Shabbat Shalom. The ancient rabbis were astute psychologists. They didn't write theories, they told stories that probed the inner life, that tried to understand why human beings do what we do, especially when we act against our own best interests. There is a brief, strange, and violent story in this week's Torah portion that has always unsettled me. A man identified strangely only as the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian father gets into a fight, and in the midst of it blasphemes God's name, is brought before Moshe, held in custody, and then after God's word is clarified, is sentenced to death. And the Torah moves on. But we should not. I find myself asking why. Yes, why is the punishment so harsh? But also, why would someone do something so self-destructive and so final? If we're honest, that question isn't really just about him. It is about all of us. Why do people lash out in ways that cost them everything? Why do we sometimes sabotage ourselves, damage relationships, or turn our anger towards others, towards life, and even towards God? We've all seen it, and maybe we've lived it ourselves. Moments when something in us breaks, not all at once, but slowly, and what comes out is not who we know and hope ourselves to be. The rabbis step into that silence with a story, a midrash that reaches back generations to fill in what the Torah leaves unsaid. They imagine that this man's story began long before this moment of cursing. They tell us that his mother, Shlomit bat Divri, because the only other place in the Torah where the phrase Ish Mitzri occurs outside of this story is in the story of Moses. That Moses goes out to his brothers and it says, Vayar Ish Mitzri. He sees an Egyptian man beating an Israelite. And in the Midrash, his mother, the mother of the person in this story, was sexually assaulted by an Egyptian taskmaster, and that violence led to the birth of this child, a child who grows up neither fully belonging to the Israelites nor belonging to the Egyptians. Years later, we're told in the Parsha that he is of the tribe of Dan. Why does the Torah provide that detail? When the Israelites organized themselves by tribal lineage, by their fathers' houses, this man sought a place among the tribe of Dan, his mother's tribe, and the people in the tribe of Dan said, "You don't belong here. Your father was Egyptian." And they turn him away, not out of cruelty, but also out of law, because the system had no place for him. And he goes to Moses. And Moses, feeling himself bound by that same law, can only say no. And that's where the rabbis ask, this story begins, Vayetze, that the man goes out. That's where the Midrash says this man was going out of. He was actually leaving Moses' court because he had gone to Moses to say, I don't have a place to stand. And Moses said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. He went out from Moses' court, and in doing so was sent out of the community and out from any sense of belonging. And only then does the Torah story begin, and he fights and he curses and destroys himself. And I think the rabbis are telling us something profound, that this wasn't just a sudden moment of rebellion. It was the final expression of a life of accumulated pain. He was, and they're telling, a man who longed for something he could not have, which was a place, a home, a sense of being claimed. And it raises two questions for us, one inward and one outward. First, what do we do with our own pain? Tragedy is not just what happens to us. It's how we experience what happens to us. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, the Holocaust survivor and psychologist Dr. Viktor Frankl writes about how as the inner life of the concentration camp prisoner tended to become more intense, they also experienced the beauty of art and nature as never before. He says, if someone had seen our faces on the journey from Auschwitz to a Bavarian camp as we beheld the mountains of Salzburg with their summits glowing in the sunset through the little barred windows of the prison carriage, he would never have believed that those were the faces of men who had given up all hope of life and liberty. Despite that factor, or maybe because of it, he says, we were carried away by nature's beauty, which we had missed for so long. He famously says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. It is that space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I have known people whose disappointments from the outside seemed small, but who could not metabolize their pain. And so it turned outward into anger, into blame, into destruction. And I have known others, truly wise people, who carry deep, deep wounds, but who have learned to hold them, to process them, to grieve them without letting them turn into bitterness. The blasphemer had no place to stand in community. If you were in his place, if I were, what would we do? Would we find a way to live with what we cannot change? Would we become patient voices for growth, or would we too reach a breaking point? And the second outward question, what kind of community do we want to create? Because the rabbis are not only analyzing a person, they are quietly critiquing the very system that they uphold and love and build. They are asking what happens when a community has no place for someone, not because they're unworthy, but because the structure itself cannot hold them. And that question is not ancient. It is right here. Do people who walk into our communities feel seen? Do they feel there is a place for them, even if their story is complicated, even if they don't fit neatly into our categories? Or do they eventually, go out? And maybe that is why this story feels so urgent, because the work isn't finished. There are still people standing at the edges of Jewish life, people who are searching, who are wondering if there is a place for them, people who carry stories that don't fit neatly into inherited categories. And there are also people sitting right here who at some point were those people. Yehuda Kurtzer, the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, writes about the difference between communities that simply function and communities that care. A functioning community can run programs, follow rules, maintain boundaries, but a community of care asks a deeper question: who is responsible for whom? And it measures itself not by how well it preserves its structures, but by how well it holds the people within, and especially those at the margins. If we hear the story of the son of Shlomit through that lens, it becomes even more piercing. The system functioned, the law was upheld, but where was the care, the rabbis are asking? And that is our question to answer. On Shavuot, in less than 3 weeks, the holiday on which we celebrate Revelation, and in a deep sense, the possibility that we can enter into Torah and covenant, we are going to create a space to hear these stories. On Thursday evening, May 21st at 7:30 p.m., we're beginning the evening by hosting a panel of members of our own community who will share what it has meant for them to move from insider to outsider, what helped them, what it felt like to stand at the edge, what helped them to step inside, and also what still remains complicated and unfinished. Because if we're serious about building not just a functioning community, but a community of care, then we need more than good intentions. We need to listen to one another. So I want to invite you, literally invite you, Thursday, May 21st, 7:30 p.m. here, to be there, not just to attend, but to show up with curiosity, with openness, with the willingness to be changed by what you hear, because Torah is not just what was revealed once at Sinai. It is revealed when we truly hear one another's stories, and perhaps if we listen well, we can become the kind of community that the son of Shlomit never found, but that we are capable of building. Shabbat Shalom.